Welcome back to another episode of the Morning Buzz. I'm Russell Gahagan from Russell's Fishing Tech. Morning Buzz is brought to you by Torquay Coffee, which is my favorite drink in the morning, and I know Nate's definitely got his Torquay Coffee ready to go. This morning, my guest is going to be Nathaniel Cook from Fish Stick Fishing. Fish Stick is a charter fishing boat out of Sheboygan, but I've been looking forward to this particular podcast here since I decided to start doing these. One of the things I wanted to do when I started to do the Morning Buzz was sort of try to do a podcast that was not only interesting, but maybe a little bit educational for all different types of salmon and trout fishermen, from the 100% newbie all the way up to the charter captain level. And so far, we've talked boats, we've talked offshore planer boards, we've talked to Dumper Dan, a long-term charter captain. And today we have Nate Cook, who sort of is going to bring us to the level of started fishing X years ago, now charter captain. And Nate, why don't you go ahead and start by just introducing yourself, your business, and exactly that. Where and how did you start, and where are you at now?
Sounds great. Thanks, Russell, for having me. My name is Nate Cook, captain and owner of Fish Stick Fishing. And I have been fishing on the water for a while, but probably not as long as some other guys. I started in 2012, actually. I can still remember my first time out on Lake Michigan. And, you know, I went back and actually had some video footage from being out there that first time. It's just crazy looking back at some of the things we were doing and experiences we had. So I feel like I've come a long way as a fisherman in the last 8-9 years. It's been a lot of learning, a lot of time on the water, but it's been really good and really exciting, and I love being out there.
Yeah, no, so I think one of the things that will make this episode really fun to listen to is sort of just kind of we're going to go through your progressions at least to start here. So I would say that you're right. In a lot of cases, especially when it comes to a charter captain, not all, but a lot, either, you know, they start as a first mate as a kid. You know, when I say a kid, I'm talking, you know, teens. And then they progress into a captain later on, or, you know, in my case, and I think a lot of people's cases, they were, you know, brought into the business just through their family tree. You know, they grow up in the business. So you're in your 30s, and, you know, you started fishing what is basically 8 or 9 years ago. So even though you haven't been fishing a long time, obviously you have a ton of experience because you fished quite a bit in the last, you know, 8 to 10 years. But walk us through that a little bit. Like, you know, walk us through level one, like you just said, when you started and you fished your first time, and some of the mistakes you guys made and things you did that you sort of chuckle at now. Bring us to, you had an 18-foot boat that you fished a few tournaments on in Sheboygan and stuff like that, and you went to Sturgeon Bay and fished the KD, and sort of what you were at, where you were at there, and sort of what you think you learned in that span. And then now, obviously, you own a 10-meter Trojan and you run charters on a daily basis all summer long. So you're sort of at that end level now to some extent.
Yeah, sure. So looking way back at the beginning, I actually ended up getting it. I had never been out, you know, before. It was just after college was wrapping up, and a buddy of mine asked if I was interested in going out, and I said, sure. You know, I've always fished inland waters. I love fishing for panfish and bass, you know, things like that. But getting out in Lake Michigan sounded cool, so went out with a buddy in a 16-footer. And again, I had a chance to look back at some of those memories, and we went out like sunset in the 16-footer, and basically we didn't have a bite. It was a nice, beautiful, calm evening, and we did not have a bite until like 4:30 a.m. And we stayed awake all night waiting for that one bite. And when we got it, it was great. And, you know, we're like, oh man, it was so worth it being out there. And looking back at it, you know, it's just different things we would have tried or different techniques to do that. You know, going from that, I would say once the first time I probably went about 2 times in July in 2012. And the second time was when I got to actually reel one in. And as soon as that happened, I mean, I really was hooked. It became like, you know, I'm sure a lot of fishermen will talk about it. It's an addiction. Just that feeling of waiting for that bite and getting that fish to bite on something you put out there is just a great feeling. And when I caught that first salmon, I think it was like a 13-pound king. And to me, I'm like, this is awesome. This is a huge fish. This is a great time out here. And, um, you know, looking back at that, I went probably about a month and I was shopping for that boat you were talking about. Never owned a boat before. I went out with my buddy's 16 footer. I'm like, I want something a little bit bigger probably so I can be out here when it's a little rougher sometimes. And got my boat, got it all set up. And pretty soon, I would say that second year, I was probably driving. I live near Appleton. And I was driving to Lake Michigan probably 4 nights a week, I would say on average in the summer. There's just that addicting that I just wanted to be out there. I had to be out there. And so it put a lot of time, I was able to get a lot of time in. I would say one of the things that, really helped me is talking to different people. And I would say when I first started, I probably had more questions than anybody else I knew. I felt like I was driving them nuts because I wanted to learn and wanted to learn it fast. And so as I would go to different places, I fished out of different places. I fished anywhere from, way up to Washington Island in Door County in that KD tournament you're talking about. A lot of great memories in that KD tournament doing that, all the way down, to Sheboygan, and everywhere in between. And I would say one of the places that I really enjoyed going the most probably was Sheboygan because, not only does it have good launch facilities and everything for guys who are using trailerable boats, but when I stopped in your tackle shop, you were very helpful for me and took the time to answer all my questions, which were a lot. And I know that when I'd stop in there, you'd have tackle I need and everything like that. So that was really helpful, and I really appreciated that. And I think that really helped me, some of the advice you gave me to speed through that learning curve a little bit faster.
Yeah, so
and now,
one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is, to me, Nate, you are the perfect example of today's world of social media, networking, things that we talk about all the time. Like, last weekend I had the event here at the store and I gave 3 days of salmon school. Friday was a novice, Saturday and Sunday were advanced. And we talk a lot about networking. We talk a lot about social media. We talk a lot about leaning on the local, tackle stores and things like that. And you're sort of the perfect example to that because, again, I feel like even though 2012 to 2021, 9 years can be considered a long time, in the maturation process of a salmon angler, it's really not. Like I said, and this is no knock because I think, and I've told you this, I think your level of where you're at is as good as many others, but it took many others 30 years to get there. So you were able to figure out sort of the cheat code to, in a lot of ways to accelerate that process. And I think a couple of ways that, you mentioned that you've done that is obviously it's been beneficial. Our relationship's been beneficial mutually because you've been a great customer of mine at the tackle store, but you've also, it's also helped you, accelerate that process. On the flip side of that, one question I want to ask when you mentioned you bought that boat. So you had that 18-foot boat for basically until last year. You still have it, but you used that boat regularly last year. How many different times did you rig that boat or change the rigging on it fairly drastically?
Well, I definitely had, a lot of learning curve in how I wanted the boat set up too. It definitely has changed a lot and evolved a lot since day one and now. After all the time on the water now, I feel like I'm getting close to exactly where I want that boat. But yeah, I guess kind of I think what you're alluding to is there's been a lot of changes in that. I've used a whole bunch of different products. I've used different setups for rod holders, different places to put rod holders. Lots of different stuff. Added pieces, added different bow mount trolling motor to it to give me different options. And yeah, there's been a lot of evolution in that.
Yeah, and I think the point that I wanted to make there was one of the mistakes you probably made, even and still made, that you wish you could probably take back, if I could guess, and you can answer this honestly either way, is I bet you wish you'd have rigged it once. And that seems
Yes.
to be a common mistake for weekend anglers, and it's just natural, right? So you just get going 100 miles an hour, and if you're not lucky enough to walk into the door at our place or a place like ours that can educate you on what you really need, and it's not always the most expensive stuff. I think you've known me long enough to know. I'll use an example. On your 18 footer, and then also on your charter boat, you have Canon dual axis ratcheting rod holders. There's
Yep.
about 3 or 4 ratcheting rod holders that are quite a bit more expensive. In my opinion, you need that ratcheting rod holder as a diver holder, or it's a huge advantage. But you don't have to have the most expensive one. So that's where I tell customers a lot of times, listen, I'm not trying to sell you anything, but we want you to have the boat set up the right way so that you can avoid tangles and it's easy to use and things like that. So I kind of figured that that would be one of the cases, and it's one of the things I see with customers almost every day is they're re-rigging something that they wish they would have just did right the first time. So maybe walk us through that. What'd you start with on the boat to maybe what you ended with, or where you're at now on the charter boat? And what did you kind of learn through that process that you might be able to share with some of the folks at home?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Russell, you're right for sure. Basically, I would my, one piece of advice, and I guess I picked this up and I hear you say this, obviously, Russell, is I guess buy what you really want and what you actually need the first time. Because otherwise you're going to, you may spend a little bit more doing that up front, but otherwise you're going to spend a lot more in the long term. I know that I've spent a lot more. Don't tell my wife. I've spent a lot more in the long term by buying different pieces. I started off with some pretty cheap items, anywhere from rods and reels that had cheap drags in them, and the drags would wear real quick, or rod holders that were really more like a plastic type rod holder that I didn't have a ton of confidence in, like when I had a mag dipsy in it and it was cranking in the rod holder.
Yep.
To have your expensive rod and reel combo sitting in there made me a little nervous at times. So upgrading components like that, looking at different downriggers. I know I had some basic manual downriggers, and eventually, I realized I'm out here so much that I'm going to invest in an electric downrigger, and I've been happy with that. And obviously, personally, having a charter, things like that, to have the electric downrigger is just such a time saver. And I'm out here enough, I can justify having an electric downrigger. So it's different stuff like that, and try to think long term rather than just in the moment. I know that first year when I was rigging the boat, I'm like, I got to get whatever I can and as much as I can. And obviously, it was a pretty big expense in and of itself, even getting some of the cheaper things just to get everything set up right away. But I wish I would have spent a little bit more and just done it right the first time instead of racing to get out with whatever I could get my hands on.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. One thing to mention, you mentioned the downrigger. So you got a unique setup on your charter boat now. You have one downrigger on there now, and I know there's, you and I have talked about whether you're going to add a couple more or not. The thought process was, maybe 3, but due to the pandemic and a whole bunch of other stuff last year, stuff was just tough to get. So you got one, threw it on the boat. Caught a lot of fish on that downrigger.
Yeah.
Fish, mostly lake trout, but overall a lot of fish. And when you're running charters, action is action a lot of the times. And talk a little bit about that, because I know that was new to you. I know you and I did it some. Talk a little bit about that lake trout deal. The cowbells on there that I talk about, and you fished last year. Just maybe give the folks at home sort of an insight onto, on the daily basis, how many more fish that put in your boat. Whether you want to eat lake trout or not, they're fun to catch, and it's the one species you can actually release if you want to, for the most part. So maybe just give them a rundown of that, because obviously it's one of those things where I talk a lot about it, but I think it's nice to hear it from another person too.
Sure. Yeah. So just real quick, I want to touch on that downrigger thing you're talking about, just one downrigger. It reminded me that when I first set up that 18 footer you're talking about, I wasn't a walleye trolling guy. So I had never run planer boards before. And so on Lake Michigan, I actually had the buddy I originally went out with, we brought his downriggers onto my boat, and we were running 4 downriggers off my 18-footer and a couple divers, and that's it. And I never ran planer boards. I would say probably the first couple years I fished out there almost.
Yep.
Just because it wasn't something I was comfortable with. And now looking at kind of that evolution and looking at almost like an opposite type of perspective where you're running those planer boards now and only having one downrigger on a boat that could handle 4 if you really want it,
Yep.
It's just interesting seeing that learning. But anyway, getting back to the one downrigger and seeing the lake trout, I have been impressed with how many fish that downrigger has caught. And you're right, those lake trout are really fun to catch. They have great head shakes and they fight hard. And it's really nice, actually. I would say there are times when the other fish will not bite. When you're out there, some of the fish, the salmon or the steelhead are not biting. Where as a charter captain and you have customers that want to catch fish, it's nice to be able to have lake trout that a lot of times you can hopefully catch a few of those while you're out there.
Yeah, you and I fished together last year probably 20 plus times, would you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say on that average, I bet we caught 150 plus fish on that downrigger in those 20 some trips. I mean, I think we probably averaged 6 to 8 fish a trip on that downrigger because I know there was multiple days we had double digits in there for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. So if you've got kids, or if you just like catching fish, you're purely going on Lake Michigan, you like to catch fish. We all want to catch a 25-pound salmon on every rod, but it's just, not every day is that relative. So having that one rigger down deep with a cowbell and a spinning glow on it, or a Dodger and a spinning glow for lake trout, can double your catch on an average day, for sure. So that's a great, I think, tip for anglers out there. Let's talk a little bit about your charter business, and I think what's unique about that charter business. So, obviously there's lots of charter businesses up and down the lake, and in my opinion, there's a lot of great charter businesses that somebody can fish with, and have a great time. I've had Dumper Dan on. He probably is maybe the elite of elite when it comes to Wisconsin charters with many boats. Dumper personally. Great guy, runs a great business. I think one of the things that you offer that's unique, that you get a lot of calls on, and I know people talk to me about, and I send them your way for, is sort of an on-the-water class. For somebody who's just getting into salmon fishing or only been doing it a short time, and they're sort of confused on whether maybe they're doing things the right way, or they're having some troubles on, setting the gear and operating the boat and things like that. You're one of the few guys, I would say, that is, sort of consistently willing to, if the customer wants, sort of put the fishing maybe secondary and the learning maybe first on a particular trip. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think you're right. I would say that my teaching background helps a lot with that. I think, having patience to show people stuff, and the interest. I enjoy answering people's questions if they have questions about things. I always tell people, when they call, ask away, ask whatever questions you want. I'll be happy to help you out. I think for me, part of that is when people have questions, it shows an interest in what they're doing beyond just cranking in a fish, which obviously is a lot of fun. But when people want to learn what they're doing or whatever, I think that taps into that teacher side of me and helps with, it ties into that a little bit, which is good. Basically with the questions and showing people what to do when, I've reeled in a lot of fish over the last 8-9 years, and I love it. I still love it. I enjoy doing it, but there's something about when I can take somebody else out on the water and see them ask questions and understand what's going on, and then to see their excitement when they catch fish. To me, I would say now personally at the point where I'm at, I get almost more enjoyment or excitement watching somebody else have those experiences for the first time or maybe the 10th time, and just seeing them catch fish and be excited about being out on the water. that really, really is what drives me now, I would say.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to set the record straight on a couple things right now. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. You are Nate from Nate's Dream Scale. So those people at home that love salmon candy flashers and flies and things like that, and know that we talked a lot about last year and early this year that one of the hottest flashers on Lake Michigan last year was the Nate's Dream Scale. You are Nate.
Yep.
Okay, so
Yes.
we'll set that straight right now. Give the story a little bit about Nate's Dream Scale and the beating you gave me on a regular basis with Nate's Dream Scale, and then I'm going to come back with some stories on maybe some of the fun we had, but talk a little bit about that, the development of that, and how it worked out, because there was a certain fly on that flasher that when you were running that was sort of unintentional, but ended up working out because some things played out the way they did. So go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So, well, when I first started, looking at it, when you first start salmon fishing, you look at what's on the shelf and everything like that. And after a while, some guys, like to talk or like to look at customizing different stuff. And so I had a flasher that, had worked for me, but I'm like, I'm going to try something a little bit different. So I put a piece of that green scale tape on it and started running it. And I paired it with the Milwaukee minnow fly, and it started catching fish. And I was like, this is awesome. It's a pretty simple looking flasher when you look at it. I mean, there's a lot of other flashers that have different color combinations and things, but for me, this flasher has been really consistent. And so been running it, and I know I've gotten a lot of grief for it. People a little skeptical that it works, but I think if they've seen me run it or if they've seen it in action, I think it'll prove itself for them.
Yeah, no doubt that you definitely impressed me, and that takes quite a bit. I would consider myself a tackle guru, so there isn't much that slides by me when it comes to tackle. But I looked at that thing and told you multiple times I didn't think it was worth its weight in gold, and it made it gold. So, but it impressed me. It was a great combo, and as maybe a lot of folks at home know or don't know, Poseidon Flies made that Milwaukee minnow, and they decided to sort of close up shop. A couple of brothers who loved to fish and wanted to spend more time fishing and less time tying flies. So Salmon Candy picked up 6 of their most popular patterns, one of which was Milwaukee minnow. And that gave us the opportunity to really promote that combo that you had been fishing, that Milwaukee minnow with that Nate's Dream Scale. And you caught a lot of fish on that last year, which is surely fun. And I think it'll be really good again this year. In my seminars last weekend, I talked about family fishing when it comes to pairing like flasher colors, spoon colors, things like that. One thing that you actually taught me this year by default was when the blue stud took off and the chrome stud was, has been good for a couple of years, and we had Mountain Dew stud and yada yada. I'd come down to the boat in the morning to run a trip with you, and you had been running a couple of trips with, some of our other help. And I'd look at the rods, and you guys would have 4 blue studs on, 2 chrome studs, 2 Mountain Dew studs. And, if anybody doesn't know, on every boat I fish on, it's sort of, I run half the boat, you run half the boat. But you taught me a lot about that family fishing this year, and that's what I'm calling it, family tackle, whatever you want to say. And what I mean by that is, you guys weren't afraid to throw a bunch of the same looking stuff on, and it really worked. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah. Yep.
So maybe talk about that a little bit. I mean, obviously, you're just out there and you're trying to find more baits that are working, but I mean, just, maybe evolve into that a little bit. Like, what was the thought process there? And it worked, but I mean, is that something you plan to do going forward? And how many of one color would you maybe be willing to put out versus trying to go with a couple of another color that's similar or whatever?
So I guess I would guess that this is similar to some of the walleye guys out there and their approach with things. Initially, you put a whole spread of, like a buffet out there, and give the fish choices of colors and presentations or things. And then once you decide, a certain color or pattern or presentation is working, obviously you try to duplicate that as much as you can. And so I would say initially, when we go out, if we're not sure what the fish are biting on, we're going to try a bunch of stuff. We're going to throw out a bunch of different colors, different things, and see what we can get to work. And we found that a lot of days those chrome patterns, the chrome stud, the blue stud, really worked. And so that's why you'd come down and see 3 or 4 on different rods at a time, because they were so effective. And then if we went out the next day and if the fish decided they want a different color and things weren't happening, then we'd switch it up and try different stuff. I know there were some days where certain colors were lights out, and we'd load up the rods with that stuff. And then certain days we'd find that would not be as effective. We'd try different colors, and all of a sudden, bam, we'd get a hit on a different color. So
now you've been doing this since 2012. You've obviously progressed. Didn't catch probably a ton of fish right away. Now you're a charter captain and catch, a fair amount of fish. I think, I fished with you a bunch last year. Obviously you fished without me, but I would say you had a fantastic year last year. I don't know what the final number would be, but I got to think you were averaging probably towards the double digits number for the year, somewhere in that ballpark.
Yep.
Talk about tackle a little bit. Like, what type of tackle do you like to use a lot? Has that changed? My guess is it probably has from beginning to now. What changed? And if you were going to give some of the folks at home sort of some tips for buying some tackle for 2021, what would be some of the tips you would give them?
Sure. Yeah. So, we first started 2012, we ran, again, like I said, I use the phrase, whatever we could get our hands on, whatever looked like it might work at the time. We ran everything: spoons, flashers, flies, dodgers, flies, all, everything. I mean, anything that looked like it would catch a fish, we tried. And then we started to find that there were certain things that worked better. I would say a lot of the times right now on the charter boat, I would say I'm running primarily flashers and flies. And I would say that, there's times, especially, on high lines and things, that we're running for the rainbow trout. We're running spoons up there sometimes. But if I was going to pick some different things to run, Russell, I'd have to run my dream scale. That's for sure.
Of course.
I'd be running the dream scale. But also, there were some great colors that we used. I know, that I really think that blue stud and chrome stud are going to be great again this year. Ron Bro's stud we used, that was a really good one last year.
That was a secret, Nate. That was a secret. Not anybody knew about that. You and I were running that, and obviously Ron Bro was, and we caught that magical 30-pounder for Dante on that Ron Bro's stud. That was so hard to keep that bait quiet, because we had pictures of that giant fish. We fought that thing for 45, 50 minutes.
That was a long fight.
Yeah, in the dark. What did we catch? I think 4 more fish while we fought that fish or something. I mean, we had 4 or 5 in the cooler when we put that thing in the cooler. But yeah, keep going. But yeah, that was a secret flasher that I think is going to be great again. I agree.
Yeah. So obviously, I've been running a mix of stuff. I would say in the last few years, I've been running a lot of the salmon candy flashers and flies, and have been doing really well on those. And I definitely intend to keep using those this year. They've been working great, and I'm really excited to get some of those new spoon colors and things in the water too that salmon candy has. That should be pretty exciting to see those in action.
Talk about that a little bit, Nate. Just again, from the perspective of your development in fishing. So, when you say you tried anything, I 100% agree with you, because I saw some of the stuff you have in your tackle box. You tried everything and anything. But talk about that salmon candy fly deal, the interchangeable thing, yada, yada. Because here's the thing, right? I can promote it all I want. I can talk about it. And people believe me, and we sell a ton of it. But, they're like, Russell's trying to sell me the farm, right? I know for a fact, because I fished with you so much last year, how much you used that interchangeable system. Because you guys aren't afraid to change stuff. That I'll give you credit. I mean, I'll come down to the boat on Monday and run a trip with you. Come back on Wednesday and it looks nothing like it did Monday. So talk a little bit about that, because I know I know how many leaders you had up there. You weren't retying stuff every other day. You used, the same 20 leaders all season. So talk a little bit about that, and talk about, some of those changes compared to what you did in 2012, 2015, 16, maybe to now.
Yeah. So, yeah, part of that, my growth was doing things like attending seminars that you presented. And I know in some of your seminars that you talked about these flies and getting, just using them consistently and breaking them in, and having your hot leaders and hot flies. And so I started doing that and tried to be consistent with that. And I feel like that's really worked for me also. And so I keep doing that. Having the interchangeable flies is really nice because just like we talked about a few minutes ago, the some days fish want a certain color, and when you can load up on that color, it's great. And then if they decide they want a different color, having that interchangeable fly system is really nice because then you can just pop off the flies of a certain color, put on a different color, and hook it up, and you're good to go. So it's really quick, especially when you got customers out there, and obviously people want lines in the water, and I want lines in the water so we can be catching fish. Saving time is really important.
Yeah, and I noticed that, of course, with me, but also a lot without me, you guys were family fishing the flies like you were the flashers. And what I mean by that is, I think early in the year, you had a lot of Mercy UV on, a lot of stuff, maybe some illumination. And then all of a sudden, that Milwaukee minnow got hot. And I noticed that, both you and I were digging for like no mercy, some green flies, Brad's 21, stuff like that. And all of a sudden we had that on everything. And what sort of was interesting about that was, yeah, we definitely dug through the flasher box a lot. And I remember certain days, if you remember, Kryptonite was really good for you on a few days. SGH was really good for me on a few days. If you took, Blue Stud, Chrome Stud, Mountain Dew Stud, Green Jeans, Nate's Dream Scale, and put them in one pile, right? Then you'd probably have a pretty big heaping pile of stuff we tried over the season that all worked, but maybe worked for a few days. Megatron would be another one I'd put in that pile. Worked for a few days to a few weeks, but we sort of were, like you said, rotating those out as we thought the fish wanted them. But what was interesting was all of those, and Kryptonite comes to mind, SGH comes to mind, worked at different times with different flies. And that's what I think is so interesting, right? So I remember a couple times where I ran SGH in June. We had a kind of a magical trip with a couple friends of mine, Rich Stadler and Tim Winchester. And I say magical because I think we had 20 plus bites, 29-pound king, couple 25-pound kings. And we ran that SGH on the center rigger with a Mercy behind it. And then I remember in like August, Mercy being just on, SGH being just on fire with illumination behind it on a board rod for us. So I guess it goes to show that, you just keep working at it, you just keep rotating through baits, and you'll be able to put a program together, like we were able to do quite a bit last year.
Right. Yep.
So why don't you tell people where they can find fish stick fishing if they're looking to just go on a charter? Or I think a lot of people that might watch this, might be at home thinking, okay, I want to accelerate my learning curve like Nate did. And one of the opportunities we talked about is either, come to a Russell's Fishing Tech seminar, watch Russell's Fishing Tech videos, or book a trip on the fish stick, go fishing with Nate, and have Nate sort of, show you while you're out having fun catching fish anyways, what to do on your boat to catch more fish.
Yeah. So again, my name is Nate Cook, and you can check out Facebook page, Fish Stick Fishing. Also have a website, fishstickfishing.com. And I have a phone number, 608-333-1814. You can text, call, any questions, anything like that. But yeah, I love the idea of taking people out there. I like having more or less what you'd call almost like school out on the water, where people come out, ask questions. I've had lots of people call me and say, I want to learn. Can you show me what you're doing? Can you teach me what you're using? And absolutely, I enjoy doing that. So don't hesitate to give me a call and set something up to do that.
All right, we're getting to the end here, so we're gonna do story time. And I enjoy this part. So you might have to think for a second, but think of your favorite story from the year on a trip that you and I ran together. Doesn't have to be, necessarily about catching a fish, but it could be. Just what is your favorite story from 2020? From you and I running a trip together, and then I'll share mine.
Well, I have a story. I would say this is my most memorable story. One of them. getting lines set up in the morning, get out there, and looking at getting the nice fish hawk set up on the downrigger. And I clip it on and I'm putting my line out and get the rod all set, ready to go. I'm about to hook it into the downrigger, and all of a sudden I hear snap, plop, and I look at the end of the downrigger cable that's swinging like this, and I'm like, oh man. And I turn around and look at you, and you're like, what was that? And it took forever for me to actually say something. Just a fish hawk. But that was an interesting way to start a morning. But yeah, I would say too, some of the better fishing memories were just, like I said before, it's just seeing all of the people, especially the first timers that are out there, and seeing their excitement and share that same excitement that I remember having that very first time I was out there. It's so neat for me. I love seeing that. So that for me is what makes it pretty special.
Yeah. I would say this one's sort of a story about, and I was willing to share mine before about, you taught me some things about what I would call family fishing, which, picking tackle and running multiples. And that was something I never really did prior to this year a lot. And you taught me a lesson on that can be done, and it can be done effectively. And I'm glad you did. One of my favorite stories is when we first started running the cowbell on the downrigger, and I ran a couple trips with you, and you didn't know when there was a fish on it. So if anybody doesn't know, this cowbell is sort of like it's a chain of blades that rotate. And the issue with it is, or not issue, but the thing with it is it pulls kind of hard, right? So there's some resistance and stuff to begin with. Well, then on top of that, you put a downrigger on the bottom, and we were bouncing bottom, and I was showing you kind of how to bounce the bottom. So the rod's kind of already going like this. And I'll never forget the first trip. We did real well with it. I think it might have been with our buddy Patrick maybe or something, and his kids or something, but we caught like 8-9 fish on it. And I don't think you saw a single bite. I went running past you every time, and you were just looking at me and you were like, Russell, how do you know there's one on there? I mean, that's what
they're just staring at it.
Yeah, that's what the fun part with salmon and trout, right? Is it's almost obvious at all times you have one on. Almost obvious. Everybody on the boat almost knows there's one on the line, except for when you have one on a downrigger and it's a lake trout. Sometimes you have no idea, and you're staring at that rod, and then all of a sudden, bloop, I go right by you to grab it. But the cool part about that is, I would say by the end of the year, you obviously had a knack for it. You were doing very well without me, and you guys were catching, a pile of fish, obviously, on that same rod. So you figured it out. But that was sort of one of my fun favorite stories is just them first couple trips catching 6, 8, 10 fish on that rod, and you never really even knew if we had one on, and it was a ton of fun. So I appreciate you coming on the show, Nate. I also appreciate the great job you do on the fish stick boat and helping educate other people out on the water and just take people out and show them a great time. So I think you're the perfect story of started at the beginning and got to what I would consider a advanced level in a very quick hurry. And that happened because you were willing to put the effort forward to make it happen at whatever the situation was. So congratulations to you, on being able to do that and become a great fisherman in a quick hurry. This is Russell's Fishing Tech. I'm Russell Gahagan with Nate Cook, and that was our morning buzz.